Kind of giving you a 5-minute warning that we'll be starting here in just a few minutes. All right, well, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started because I know you don't want to be here all night long. Well, you might want to play with these and talk to him, but we want to get started right away. Just a few quick announcements. If you're looking the way I am, if you look back at the back, the men's restroom is to your right, like you're headed out, and the ladies is on the left. We do have the children's program. If you weren't aware of the children's program, you have neighbors or kids, they're welcome to come. We have the kids program there. It's important that when you came in, you actually registered. Did everybody here get a raffle ticket when they came in? Okay, if you skipped that and you walked right in, you might want to go back. So at the end of every meeting, including tonight's meeting, we have lamps here. We've got two different options, bubble wrap for protection here, but they're between a 1st and 3rd century genuine artifact that is going to be given away each night for these first 5 nights between here and Thursday. So we want to make sure you are in for that drawing. You probably also got a little scan number. That'll just make it quicker for the rest of our nights. So we're really excited here at the Puyallup Seventh-day Adventist Church to have this program available for you. My name's Jason Canfield. I'm the senior pastor here. Ryan Bing is the other pastor. He's out there in the lobby somewhere. You probably met him on your way in, but we're just really glad you can be here and excited Tony could make it. He's got quite a display here, and I know because I saw the suitcases, there's a lot more to come. So there will be different artifacts out here. You won't want to miss them. So each night is going to be very special. Tony, I'm going to just turn the time right over to you and let you get going. So no need to stare at me. They came here to hear you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's good to be back in this part of the world. I was here sometime in the past and spoke at the college and presented this series there, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. You know, time just kind of goes fast in your mind. And it's great to come back up to the Northwest. We live in Southern California. So we came up on Friday and we'll be here for a week. And so we look forward to being here with this great weather. I do recall the last time I was here, it was in the springtime, so it was a little different kind of weather. Oh, thank you. We actually left Southern California, Los Angeles on Friday, and it was cold, like 65, 70 degrees, and got here and it was hot. So my friend Candy told me it's like that all the time here. It's just sunny and anyway. We have a lot of artifacts here. I'll talk a little bit about the artifacts. You're welcome to come up before or afterward. Every night I'll put out new artifacts that try and match up with what we're talking about. We'll have some nice biblical coins along the way. And here we have something, I'll just kind of say this is a replica of the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone, the original, is where? In the British Museum. We'll tell the story about how it was found. Fascinating story tonight. They had forgotten how to read hieroglyphs, and then there were 3 bands of writing on it. This became the key for deciphering the hieroglyphs. Now, the original is 4 feet high, so the British Museum made this as a very nice little replica that can be portable, about 1 foot high. And there are a couple other replicas up here, and then everything else is original. So we have some really nice lamps like this. This is actually a chandelier. It's a 4-wick lamp from the time of Abraham, so we're talking 2100, 2500 BC, early Bronze Age. This is our earliest piece here. This is what they call the Chalcolithic period, so they haven't even started making bronze yet, just somehow started melting rocks in the fire. Joey, I don't know how they did it, maybe they just around the campfire. I've always wondered about that. I've been in places where they did a lot at a place called Punan. Can you imagine they found 100,000 tons of slag for making copper there? And by the way, Punan is mentioned. Somebody said, I would like to do a tour following the route of the children of Israel through the Exodus. I actually went to Punan filming a series. We have a new series called The World of the Patriarchs, and we're about to release The World of the Exodus. But anyway, in that, 100,000 tons of slag. Can you imagine? My arm shakes, so I'm just going to get that out of the way. My arm developed a little shake, so I'm not frightened about being here. It's just an irritating thing that has happened in the last year or two. So I'll try not to worry about it if you don't worry about it, okay? So anyway, this is before they started mixing tin with copper to make bronze. This is a very nice piece here. TSA broke it a couple of years ago, so it's got a crack in it. This is from the early Bronze Age, and so it's just a bowl. Turns out that there's a place that people like to get buried in Jordan. It was called Bab-edh-Drah, the gate of the arm. They find that 500,000 people were buried there. And they were all buried with pottery. And they went out of business pretty early. Probably was a place called Sodom in the Bible. Went out of business pretty early, and all of this pottery. So this kind of pottery here, a lot of that on the antiquities market. This kind of pottery here, all from Bab-edh-Drah, early Bronze Age. You come down a little bit later, and there's some more precious pieces down here. By precious, I mean very, very few of them. So we'll talk about these different things as we go along. You're welcome to come up and look at them each night. This is kind of an interesting piece for Egypt. This is a little piece of wrap. So this turns out we're at a place I'm going to talk about tonight called the Shore, at a pyramid for a guy named Senusret II. Now just keep that in mind, because you'll hear me say that was probably where Joseph buried the Pharaoh of his day. Anyways, we're there at that spot, we're walking around, and all of a sudden I'm kicking in the sand, and there's a mummy in the sand. So I hate to tell you, but I did cut a piece of the wrap off. It was kind of interesting. So anyway, there's some other interesting things from Mesopotamia. So we'll be going to Mesopotamia on Thursday night. Tomorrow night we're going to Petra. By the way, how many people have been to Egypt? How many people like to go to Egypt? Everybody. I'm going to Egypt in a couple of weeks again. I have a tour for pastors from the south that I'll be doing for a couple of weeks, my wife and I. And we love Egypt. Egypt is a fascinating world. Tomorrow night we're going to Petra. How many people have been to Petra? How many people like to, I know you'd all like to go to Petra, right? Oh, yes. Indiana Jones went there, right? And he found the Holy Grail. Is that right? Anyway, we'll tell all of the story of Petra, how it was lost to the west for over 600 years and why it was lost. Fascinating story. And then in Jerusalem on Tuesday night, the Jew, the Arab in Jerusalem will look at this, my favorite city. I've probably spent a couple of years there cumulatively. And we'll look at the city of Jerusalem. And then the footsteps of Jesus. I actually have a series called Tracing the Footsteps of Jesus that plays on certain television networks. 28 episodes. We had 7 one-month film trips over a 4-year period filming that series. We're going to condense that into one presentation for you. You won't be here all night, but it will be a photo essay taking you in the footsteps of Jesus on Wednesday night, and then Thursday night when Iraq ruled the world. And so we'll look back at ancient Iraqi culture. We have a nice little cuneiform tablet here from Iraq on the table, and a nice little cylinder seal. And one night, probably on Thursday night, we'll try and pull this seal and see if we can get the impression. So if you look at it carefully, you can see all kind of guys in here, and looks like moons and stars, and we'll put it into the clay and see what it looks like. Does that sound good? We'll try and do that on Wednesday night. So anyway, lots of nice little things. And as Pastor Jason said, we have an artifact. I just bought about 35 of these lamps in Jerusalem when I was there, along with another treasure that I'll show you one night, a double-headed Asherah goddess. Pristine in its look, and I'll share that with you as we go through the week. And we have some biblical coins. Anyway, we'll have a lot of different things coming out on the screen. We're glad you could be with us tonight, and hope you can join us for the week. We're excited to be here and enjoy this good weather and be able to share with you. So tonight we're going to talk about Egypt. It's amazing discoveries in the land of the Nile. So Egypt, the very name stirs our minds with wonder. Pyramids, Sphinx, mummies, Tutankhamun. Egypt seems to hold a spell over our imagination. What are the mysteries of its ancient buildings? They possess mystical powers. Why were they built, and by whom? Herodotus, that early world traveler, said, Egypt has wonders more in number than any other land, and works it has to show beyond expression great. Tonight I want to take you on a fascinating journey to this wonderful land of the pyramids to investigate the wonders that Herodotus saw 2,500 years ago. But first I want to take you to Cairo, the modern capital of Egypt. It is one of this world's largest cities. Being situated on the edge of the desert, it's a crowded, dusty city with over 20 million people, yet it's one of the most vibrant cities in all the world. And it has thousands of buildings and monuments spanning nearly 5 millenniums, from Pharaonic down through Greek, Roman, Coptic, and Muslim. It's a wonderful city of contrast, from the dry sands of the desert to the life-giving waters of the Nile. From the people who make their living collecting and sorting the garbage to the socially elite, Cairo is the very heartbeat of Egypt. Now, when you're in Egypt, you're presented with many different ways to travel. You have the dilapidated streetcars and the modern subways, the old buses and the age-old feluccas, speedy taxis, or the time-honored method of going by foot. Each outing can be both a challenging and enriching experience, like the time I wandered into the Khan el-Khalili Bazaar, where the famous Egyptian cotton fabrics are sold. This truck could not make the turn down a crowded, narrow street, so they did what they do here in Puyallup. A group of men swarmed around, picked the truck up, moved the back of it around, and just pointed in the direction it should go. That's what you'd always do, right? Pretty impressive. And this man had the fastest iron in the East. He was ironing the gelabi with his feet, spraying a mist of water from his mouth, and folding it with his hands. How inventive. But I have to say my favorite leisure activity is strolling by the Nile in the cool of the evening. I enjoy seeing the sailors working their boats in the city's skyline at night. It never seems to get old to me. And it seems to be a favorite of the locals too, because the streets are always full of Cairoites enjoying their city in the cool of the evening. Now, the Nile has always been the source of life for Egypt. Herodotus, an early world traveler, said, "Egypt is the land of the Nile, and the Nile is the gift of the gods." Well, let's explore that. For over 4 millenniums, this river has nourished one of Earth's greatest civilizations. Indeed, we can say that Egypt's very existence has always depended upon the Nile. Egypt is a pure desert. Look at the desert. That's the Sahara Desert, with a river flowing through it. Now, it doesn't really rain there, so we have to ask the question, where does this water come from? Well, it comes from the rainforest of Central Africa. You can kind of see the Nile going up through here, flowing 4,350 miles from south to north, kind of like the St. John's down in Florida. And then you can kind of see it flowering out when it gets to the delta. It's about 1 to 15 miles wide in the basin, and then it flowers out to about 150 miles wide. Now, it's interesting because the river flows from south to north. In the north is Lower Egypt, in the south is Upper Egypt. So we can actually think about Egypt as an island floating in the midst of the Sahara Desert. It's this lengthy geography bound by the Libyan Desert to the east, the west, I should say, the Arabian Desert to the east, and then the Great Cataract at Aswan to the south, and the Mediterranean to the north. Now, a cataract is a waterfall, and these waterfalls were created by these ridges of granite lying across the river. So it made it impossible to come by boat from the south, from the land of Nubia or Central Africa. For over 50 centuries, 99% of the people have lived on just 1% of the land. Ancient Egyptians called it the Black Land. It's known as Abyssinian carpet, and it's some of the richest farmland in the world. Isn't that beautiful? Here we can see the life-sustaining valley, 1 to 15 miles wide. The desert is an ever-present reality. Isn't it lovely? Now, in my later, older life, I've enjoyed doing the hot air balloon rides over Luxor in the Valley of the Kings. And here we're in a balloon, and you can kind of just see the Nile Valley from the irrigation. But look at that. One step, and you go from the black land to the red land, right? If it's not irrigated, it's just a pure desert. One step. The line of demarcation is just that distinct. The first cataract that we see here at Aswan was formed by this ridge of granite, as I said, lying across the river. It made it impassable for boats coming from the south, and so they couldn't get there, so it was very, very protected. So this is kind of the southern border, you might say, of Egypt. Here you can see the granite. From this granite, they quarried some of Egypt's greatest obelisks, statues, tombs, and so on. You might wonder, how did they cut that granite? How would they cut that granite? They didn't have iron tools until around 1000 BC, 1200 BC, somewhere in that area. All they had was bronze tools, so how would you cut it? They used this stone, diorite, black diorite. Can you see it? And they could chip it. Now, would you like to try some chipping? My wife and daughter were on one of my tours, and we put them to work there, and they're trying to chip. Can you imagine spending your life chipping granite with black diorite at 120 degrees? Those Hebrew slaves would be really happy up in the north because it's a lot cooler up there than it is there. This is how they did it. So this is actually called the unfinished obelisk. And what they do is they chip these rough gutters. See that? And can you imagine what happened? They were working on, can you see what happened? You see the crack? It was the world's tallest obelisk, and it cracked. So how would they do this? Well, they would chip, and then they would be able to put in pieces of wood. They would soak the wood to make it expand, and once it dried, they would burn the wood, and it would cause the granite to crack. And they could take that black diorite and start chipping, and just be glad that you're not a slave there, right? And they'd use this granite to build many of these monuments like this here at Karnak, and many of the statues that we see today we have in our museums, such as these, carved out of the Aswanian granite. Now, being 750 miles upriver from the Mediterranean, it was a strategic border fortress, as you can see here. And today, they've built the Great Aswan High Dam. So Egypt used to flood every year. It would leave 1/4 of an inch of topsoil in the valley every year. It would be so fertile that you would not have to irrigate. Your crops would grow all the way through without irrigating. It's the richest farmland in the world. So they built this incredible dam, and it formed Lake Nasser, 6 miles wide, 310 miles long. And so they flooded the land, and this is a problem because there are lots of temples and tombs and villages and so on that were living there. So the Nubians have had to take refuge upon the shores of Lake Nasser, along with several temples. This is the most important one that was saved, called Abu Simbel. So Ramses the Great had monuments to his glory from Lebanon in the north down into Nubia in the south, but this was his major monument, his capstone, you might say. And so they actually had to move this 212 feet from its original place. It's great to go in, and you can see people standing there in the back. And I have to just pause and tell you a little story. I'm standing there, and today you can actually pay, at least in the spring you could actually pay, and last fall you could actually pay for a camera permit. But you know, a lot of people don't like to do that. So you know what they do? They just try to, right? And the guards let you do it. And then they come to you and they say, "We need your camera." Right? And they shake you down. So it's much nicer today just to buy a ticket, right? Well, I was always trying to slip in because they wouldn't sell you a ticket and get this picture right here. And every time I get home, look at that guy on the left. You see he's in the dark? What in the world? Every time, year after year. Turns out that's Ptah. He's the god of darkness. So he's always in the dark. Anyway, it's a great thing to be able to go in and to explore this and to see the stories of Ramses the Great. And this had to be cut into over 1,000 giant jigsaw pieces and then moved up to a new cliff that had been molded to match the original 212 feet above the original location because it was being flooded. It cost millions of dollars and took several years to do. But look at this. When you see it today, you can't even see that it's really been cut. And can you imagine these 4 65-foot tall statues of Ramses the Great? Look at my wife. She barely measures up to his crown. That's how big it is. Well, this is Aswan, a prosperous city due to the construction of the dam and the industry that is created. Yet it still retains the characteristics of a small village, especially when compared to Cairo or Luxor. So I enjoy being down in this part of the world so much and going to the shops and enjoying the locals and so on, as you can see. it has the characteristics still of a small village. Elephantine Island lies a few hundred yards off the shore from Aswan. It got its strange name because of these rock formations that kind of look like an elephant, if you have an imagination. But out there is something very interesting. You see this building here? It's called the Nilometer. And actually, most of the temples along the Nile had this. And so the water would come up inside of that building, and they would actually be able to go down the steps. And as they went down the steps, they'd come down to the bottom, and there would actually be markings. You see the markings? And they could actually look at that and predict the coming floods. So the tax collectors would use this as how to project the taxes for the coming year as to how much water there would be. So almost all the temples along the Nile had these Nilometers. This is just a great one to be able to get a picture of. And so this was used all for thousands of years, and you can see now that this is more recent one for the Muslims in Arabic. Now today, this is an island of contrast. When I first went there, I should say, back in 1987, the Obira Hotel, I was kind of impressed with that, but I stepped across the wall and was back in time to a Nubian village. Today, they've excavated the village, or they moved the village and they've excavated the whole area, and it's actually a temple, Elephantine Temple. And I've actually used the hotel there a couple of times. But when I was there in 1987, it was kind of interesting. You could see the people down there beating their rugs, cleaning their rugs. I met a school teacher, and the school teacher insisted that my son, he was 10 years old at the time, he was my sole companion on this particular trip, that we come to his house and have tea. So we came to his house, kind of a nice house, and came to his house, and his wife prepared our tea on this very unusual stove. And pretty soon, the wife's mother and sisters all gathered together to watch the daily soap opera. Some things don't change around the world, right? But what a lovely family they were. With a few bends, the Nile River is perfect for river traffic. The prevailing wind from the north makes sailing south easy, and then the current flowing from the south to the north, you can just float down the river. So it made a perfect world, if you can imagine. So you got the wind blowing from the Mediterranean into the desert, right, this way, so you can kind of sail upriver, or you can float downstream going the other direction. Most people think it's pretty easy to go upriver, but that lady's doing all the work, it looks like. Well, since the erection of the Great Aswan High Dam, the Nile River no longer floods Egypt, but life is still just as dependent upon it today as it was 4,000 years ago. Here we can see how they're coming to get their water and then transport it to their villages, to their homes. We can see that even the great resorts like at Hurghada on the Red Sea have to import all their water from the Nile because it really never rains there. Really never rains there. So although there are roads and trains paralleling the river is still the bloodstream of Egypt. Isn't that beautiful? This is Aswan. You can see the ships that cruise down to Luxor, and then the feluccas. So today, the age-old feluccas are joined by the massive luxury ships plying the waters of this ancient land. Now, there are three things I'd like to share with you about ancient Egypt. Three remarkable facts that stand out. The first is it's a very, very dry climate, unlike Puyallup. Right? So things made thousands of years ago have survived down through time. In Cairo, maybe they get an inch of rain. We're down in Luxor, I have a wonderful guide that I use down there, a wonderful Christian, Coptic Christian man. Sometimes I get my words tangled up a little bit. His name is Majid. But when I'm really tired, you can imagine what I call him. Magid. So he says, just call me Max. Okay. So anyway, I'll say to Max down in Aswan, when's the last time it rained? You know what he'll say? 16 years ago. Right? Things made thousands of years ago have been preserved through time so that we can see them. This stands out about Egypt. And then the second thing is that they developed a system of writing so their achievements could be chronicled. We can look back and see what they did and what they believed and what life was like. That's kind of exciting. And the third thing is, in their tombs, they portrayed life in their tomb paintings and their carvings that we find there, so we can see what life was like back at that time. That makes it exciting too, doesn't it? Right. So the lack of rainfall in the desert makes Egypt an archaeological paradise. We can look back and see things in the past and how it's preserved the culture. This is Hatshepsut, by the way. Now, you're familiar with the mummies. Many of them have been preserved with their features and skin in place, and some still have the hairdos they had back at that time. But did you know that there were perfectly preserved people found in the desert who were never mummified? Have you seen this guy, Ginger? He's in the British Museum. The remarkable thing is his skin is still in place, his fingernail and toenails are still in place, his hair color is ginger, but he was never mummified. He was naturally mummified by being put into the sand, they say 5,000 years ago. So at least 4,000 years ago, right? Here's a picture of his hair. Look at that. So people just buried out in the sand. Worked out pretty good, right? Worked out pretty good. The Egyptian belief in the afterlife revolved around the Ka and the Ba. At death, the Ka, or the invisible double person, was released, and it dwelt near the deceased, and then it would be able to reconnect with the deceased in the afterlife if it could recognize it. That was no problem if you were buried in the sand like Ginger, right? It'd be a pretty easy thing to happen. But then the wealthy people began to dig tombs down in the bottom in the ground, right? And as they went down into the ground, their bodies naturally decayed in the damp environment, and now you had a problem because the Ka couldn't get reconnected. So what would they do? What would they do? So theologically, they have to be connected in the afterlife, or it's just not going to work. So they began to develop the idea of mummification. Now, embalm is a Latin word that means to be put into Aramaic resins. And mummy is an Arabic word that means bitumen or pitch. Now, we don't have any first-hand accounts, but we do have Herodotus who tells us kind of how they did some of this. And he talked about how they would pull the brain out through the nose with the means of an iron hook, right? And then they would wash the head out with different things and put natron in there. And then they would take the organs out and place them into these canopic jars. Now, I have to tell you that canopic comes from one of the branches of the Nile, the canopic branch, right? Because they found a whole bunch of these jars there. They put the organs into that, and then they wash the abdomen out, and they kind of sew it back up, and they put you in natron for 70 days, and then at the end of the 70 days, the 40 days to be dehydrated, then it would be wrapped in bandages with generous amounts of spices and ointments, and at the end of the 70 days, they would do this. Now, this is from King Tut's tomb. I took this just recently. You can see that Tut's dead here. That's why he's in white, right? So he's kind of been reborn in the afterlife. He's passed his 70 days. Here's the priest wearing the animal skin, the leopard skin. He's got this instrument, and he's trying to open his mouth because he wants to open his mouth so his cock can come back into, he get reunited. This is what they believed, okay? So if you understand that, then things that they're doing begin to make a little bit more sense. So it's called the opening of the mouth ceremony. Probably this priest killed him, by the way, and took his place. But anyway, then we had the development of writing. Now this is important because there have been tourists going there for about 3,000 or 4,000 years, and before they could go and read what was in the hieroglyphs and the different temples and tombs and so on. But when Napoleon went down, they'd forgotten all about that. So when Napoleon is down there, his scholars are looking and they have no idea what's there. And of course, Napoleon makes that really great statement when he says, "Soldiers of France, 4,000 years of history look down upon you. But they looked in vain at all that strange writing." What did it mean? It's kind of mysterious. They didn't know what it meant. It's really funny to read how people were trying to read different things and project different things and the conspiracies of what it was and so on. But they really didn't know. They looked in vain. They looked at all this stuff with profound frustration because they just couldn't understand what it was. How fascinating. All of this there, and they couldn't understand it. So hieroglyphs is very interesting. Hieroglyphs is a picture writing. 2,500 pictures. So if you wanted to write belief, you draw a picture of a bee and a leaf, right? Now can you imagine being literate? 2,500 pictures you got to draw, right? So being able to read and write, you're a professional scholar, right? And so that actually, often chisel these. This happens to be a cartouche. You see the circle around it? Happens to be a king's name. When you see the circle around it, it's a king's name. So something very important happened here at this town. It's called Rashid in Arabic today. You know it as Rosetta. Rosetta, because it was on the Rosetta branch of the Nile. There were 7 branches of the Nile that went to the Mediterranean anciently. One was the Rosetta branch, the Canopic branch, the Rosetta branch. So there was a fort there. Now remember, this is in the Delta. In the Nile Delta, there are no natural stones. It's just feet after feet after feet of rich topsoil from interior Africa, right? So the British were coming. So at Fort Julian, the French started trying to fortify their fort, right? So you can kind of see here stones for the fort and so on. And then look at this stone. They're trying to get anything they can to make the walls thicker. So all the stuff that they have down there is basically in temples and tombs, and it's got writing on it. So here you can see writing on that one, hieroglyphs, that I took at Fort Julian not too long ago. They came across this stone. They noticed there were 3 inscriptions on it. So they put it to the side. They thought it must be important, right? And so they thought maybe it's important. So it had hieroglyphs on it in the top. Demotic, the cursive form of hieroglyphs, and Greek. And they wondered, are they all saying the same story? Could it be the same story? Well, they made copies of it. They sent around to scholars. 24 years later, this man, Jean-Francois Champollion, broke into the silent world of pharaonic writing and deciphered the code. Can you imagine? Now today, that is in the British Museum. So my question is this: who won the naval battle? The British, of course, right? Okay. So all of a sudden, they can now start reading hieroglyphs and understanding all of this. As I mentioned earlier, the religious concept revolved around the Ka and the Ba, the house of eternity. Now, when you're up in Cairo, if you have the privilege of going there, you can go out by Memphis and then down by Saqqara. And what they would do is they would take people out and bury them in the desert, like ginger. What would be the problem if you're buried out in the desert? Animals. What kind of animals in particular? Jackals, especially. Jackals would come and dig you up, right? So they would start putting down sycamore logs on top of them. And they called it a mastaba. A mastaba. And then they put stones on top of that. So here we are at a place called Saqqara, an ancient cemetery. And you can see the fake sycamore logs on the top. They're out of stone. Kind of interesting, isn't it? And then this King Zoser does something very interesting. His brilliant engineer, Imhotep, constructs this. It's called the step pyramid. There are 6 mastabas on top of each other, right? Kind of fancy-dancy. Looks kind of cool. It's called the step pyramid. So that's the first attempt at a real pyramid. Kind of cool, huh? Yeah. 6 mastabas. Inside, by the way, they found King Zoser's statue in there, but nothing else. And then there was another attempt, Medellin. This kind of is an interesting attempt at it. But here we come down to a guy by the name of Sunefru. Sunefru, at a place called Dashur, is considered the first real pyramid. Now the problem with this, can you see what the problem is? The angles are wrong. I hate it. I would not have wanted to be the engineer. It's kind of cool to go out there because they just opened it. And you can actually go down into the chamber. I want to tell you, this is not for the faint of heart. I had somebody get stuck in that thing. It goes down about 240 feet, and the guy couldn't get out. It took about 4 hours. I ended up with a Baker's cyst behind my knee because I had to help him move up 1 rung at a time. And he'd catch his bottom on that little thing there and go up, and you can't stand up because you got to bend over. So I had pastors there in March of this year, and I ran down. I said, "I'm out of here, the first one." And I ran out. I was so sore after that. I thought, why did I run so much? Anyway, you get down to the bottom, and then you got to go back up because we got all these kind of chambers in there. And then you have to crawl on your belly through this little thing. You think you're Indiana Jones. And you finally get into where the tomb would be. And look, what's there? Sycamore logs. 4,500 years old. Can you imagine? How cool is that? How cool is that? And bats. Everywhere there are bats. So there you can kind of see it. The angles are wrong. So Senefru didn't give up, however. He built this right next to it called the Red Pyramid, and that's the first real pyramid. That one, by the way, if you ever go there and you're not with me, that's easier to go down than the bent pyramid. His son actually continued his work. So for the next millennium, every king of substance and authority would be buried under or inside of a pyramid. Some would be very small like this and just kind of like a little token. But by the less than 100 years after Zosier's craftsmen began building that step pyramid, work began on this building, the Great Pyramid of Cheops. That's the son of Senefru, who did the bent pyramid and the red pyramid. He began building this 2,300,000 blocks, weighing on average 2.5 tons each. Can you imagine? Yes. Originally it towered over 480 feet high and covered over 13 acres at its base. Now, unfortunately, no two sides are exactly the same, but the difference between the longest side and the shortest side is less than 8 inches. So it is pretty phenomenal, isn't it? And then the amazing thing is the accuracy with which it was built. The joints are 1/50th of an inch thin. You really can't even put a postcard between them. Isn't that amazing? Look at this. This was years ago when my son, who's now in his 40s, was 10. So that's an old picture there as we're out riding horses out by the pyramids. But even more amazing than the size is the accuracy with which it was born, as I said, built. It's oriented almost perfectly in line with true north. Perfect right angles and the sides 755 feet long. The difference between the longest and shortest just 8 inches, or less than 8 inches. So how did they do this? Now Herodotus, that guy we've been talking about, he said that it took 100,000 slaves 30 years to build the pyramids. Really? Well, we now know that Herodotus was a little off base. Archeologists, by the way, say they only had bronze tools and the wheel. Okay? Very, very simple. So how could it be built? Well, down in Luxor, at a place called Karnak Temple, you can kind of see that this was not finished. You see that? My little pointer's not going to work, but you can see there's a ramp that they were building up. So what they would do is they would build mud ramps up. They'd finish it and then remove the mud ramp as they went down. So they most likely built the pyramid the same way. You can see here that this is the pyramid of Khephren, and it still has the white limestone up on the top. Now originally that fine Tura limestone covered all the pyramid. There you can see it in the middle, still kind of wearing its cap there in the middle. Originally, it went all the way down. That's been recycled into other buildings through the centuries. Okay? So we look at Khephren in the middle and we think, well, that's taller than Cheops on the right. But that's because it's an optical illusion. He would not dishonor his father. It's built on higher ground. His father's is actually a taller pyramid because he would not dishonor him that way. So why would Herodotus say, be off base so far about how these things were built? Well, I want you to think about this. When Herodotus was there in 450 BC, the pyramids were further away from him in his day than the Colosseum in Rome is from us in our day. These things are really old. And so most likely he met somebody like this guy that I met. He claimed to be an informed guide, and he promised if I'd come tomorrow morning before the guards got there that he would get me into a secret meditation chamber if I'd only give a deposit tonight. And so Herodotus met somebody like that, and people just tell a story. We all want to know the story, right? So it's telling stories, and that's what happened. The Sphinx is down at the foot of Khephren, and it seems to symbolize all that's strange and wonderful about Egypt. So different with these different colors lighting it up at night. It actually is a 240 feet long. The 13-foot wide face is that of Khephren, whose tomb towers above it. It fuses together the features of king, lion, and man, and it's quite spectacular. I need to update my pictures because these were, when they were remodeling it, they've got it all remodeled now, and I lost a whole bunch of pictures and Anyway, I won't bore you with that story. So anyway, we can see this. It's 13 feet wide, the face. The nose is about the size of an average person. It's just a massive, beautiful thing. It was carved out of the limestone outcropping at the base of the pyramids. I wanted to go out very early one morning and get this picture of this stele between the paws of the Sphinx, because it tells a very fascinating story recorded by Tutmosis IV. And it was right between the paws, so I got up very early before sunrise, and a lot of the guards had gotten there in those days. And I took this picture because it tells this fascinating story. Now, Tutmosis IV was not in line to become Pharaoh, but his father and brother died quickly. And so some people thought it might be the story of the Exodus, right? So here it is. On one such day, it so happened that the king's son Tutmosis had come hunting at noon, and afterwards resting in the shadow of this great god, sleep seized him, and he found the majestic deity speaking to him as a father speaks to his child. Look at me, Tutmosis, my son. I am your father, Horus in the horizon. I promise what is my gift, earthly rule at the head of all the living. Seated on the throne of the earth god, you will wear the white crown and the red. All the territory on which the eye of the sun rests will be yours. Yours the food of the two lands. Great tribute and long life. To you I turn my face and heart for protection, since I am sick in all my limbs. The sands of this holy place upon which I rest have covered me. So Tutmosis cleared the sand, and guess what? He became Pharaoh just as the Sphinx had promised, and he put that stele there to commemorate the story. We've investigated how the pyramids were built, but now I want to just take a moment and talk about why. Why would you invest so much money and human capital in doing this? These huge mounds of stone were really just tombs for the pharaohs. That's all they were. And the reality is that it was advertising great wealth and inviting grave robbers. Now, during the New Kingdom, the pharaohs came down here to Thebes in the south, Luxor on the east bank, Thebes on the west bank, and they would tunnel into the mountain, this mountain here, to try and hide their bodies and their treasures as they hedge against thieves, but that really didn't work either. All the tombs were on the west bank of the Nile because they identified death with the setting of the sun in the west and the rising of the sun in the east. And so they thought that they would be able to catch that solar bark and live again in the future. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Now, unfortunately, all these giant mausoleums advertise the location of undreamed of wealth. Ultimately, it didn't matter whether you're buried in a pyramid or buried in the West Bank at Thebes. There was just too much money hidden. And so they would come and they would raid those tombs and steal the treasures, and that would be it. All with the exception of this one. You know him as King Tut or Tutankhamun, right? That's the only one that's come down intact from that amazing period. But before I tell you that story, I want to tell you another story about Joseph in the Bible. Can I do that? We think about Joseph in the Bible and we see these cows. When I saw these cows, these kind of fat-looking cows, and I got to thinking about that story of Joseph. Here it is. Remember, Pharaoh has a dream, and he can't... I recently was writing an article on this. Nobody can interpret the dream. Really? You really think so? 7 fat cows come out and they're eaten by 7 thin cows. Pretty ominous. Pretty straightforward. 7 fat heads of grain come out, eaten by 7 thin. I don't think anybody wanted to tell the Pharaoh. I don't think anybody had the courage to say, hey, there's going to be a famine coming, right? Joseph was called, and Joseph told him the truth about what it was. Right? So, here's what it says in Genesis chapter 41. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took a signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. What an incredible story. Well, this is a very interesting tomb painting, because in this tomb painting you can see these are not Egyptian men. These are Canaanite men. They're Semites coming down from Canaan. The Egyptians have all this incredible growth of crops. They don't keep animals. That's for lower people to do. They grow grain and wheat or corn and all their different grains, I should say. So here we see this. This is around 1800 BC in a tomb called Beni Hassan, in a place called Armana. And it's showing these people coming down. This guy was a kind of a border control guy. He was in charge of the border, and he was showing here's these people coming down with their animals into the land. We can't say that's the story of Joseph, but I can tell you this, it happens at the same time period as Joseph. We know what their names are, so it's not Joseph. So it parallels the story of Jacob coming down with his family into the land during a time of what? Famine. This wasn't the first famine, wasn't the only famine, but Joseph tells them there's going to be 7 years of good, followed by 7 years of bad. So the question is Joseph just a Jewish myth? Well, realize this, everything in the Delta went underwater. We don't find anything there, unless it's a stone that was brought from the north and placed down there. And the things that we've actually found, only a fraction have been transcribed. So we don't really have anything directly about Joseph, but we do have something that parallels it from down here in Aswan. It says, I collected corn, I was watchful in time of sowing, and when famine arose lasting many years, I distributed corn. Sounds like Joseph. The Nile has not overflowed for a period of 7 years. Herbage fails, the storehouses were built, all that was in them has been consumed. Kind of an interesting story that parallels the story of Joseph. Can't say it's Joseph, but it certainly parallels that, right? So, Bible chronology places Joseph during this fellow, Sennacherib II. That's his pyramid out of a place called Dashur. It's the 12th dynasty, what's called the Middle Kingdom. So just real briefly, you have the Old Kingdom, you have the first intermediate period when it's all chaos, and then you have the Middle Kingdom, and then you have the Hyksos period of chaos, and then you have the New Kingdom, right? All right. So here, Joseph is here in the Middle Kingdom at the beginning part of that in the 12th century under this guy, Sennacherib II. If you follow Bible chronology, if you take that if you're confident in that. And so here, Joseph, if we're right, would have actually buried his Pharaoh in this. Now you can see this is out of mud brick. So they're not spending a lot of money. Probably the first intermediate period happened because they spent all their money building those great big stone pyramids and bankrupted the country, and there were probably famines that came and so on. So they built them out of mud brick, and then they put this nice limestone on the outside that has been recycled. Now I wanted to show you this because that's a mud brick from the time of Joseph. Interesting. What do you see in there? Straw. Oh, well, that kind of parallels the story, doesn't it, right? So I thought you might like that. So what do you do if you know a famine is coming? What would you do if you're really smart? What would you do if you know a famine is coming? You store up the food, right? Just like the Bible says, that's what Joseph did. But if you're really, really smart, what would you do? Move. Now remember where everybody's coming from. They're coming from Canaan because they don't have anything to eat in Canaan, right? So as bad as it is in Egypt, it's still better than everywhere else because they still have some water coming up, right? Now, can you see the lakes off to the left? You see the lakes? It's called the Fayim. I want to zoom into that because those are not natural lakes. They're depressions. Desolate, dust-filled depressions. Sennacherib II diverts the water from the river Nile and floods these areas and puts a third more of the land under cultivation. What do you do if you're really smart? You store food, but you put more land under cultivation. You build canals and flood other areas, right? And guess what? This happens chronologically at the time of Joseph. Now, here's something totally exciting. Look at that. See the pyramid out there? Do you know what that canal is called? Joseph's Canal. I'm just telling you. Now, if they'd forgotten all about this, it was a very dry period in the Greek-Roman period. They forgot all about it. A British engineer found this at the end of the 19th century and theorized this, but they didn't do it. They didn't need the land. In the 1950s, they flooded the area again, and it's one of the largest oases in the world today, but it's a man-made oasis. And that canal, when I saw that, I thought, how cool is that? Joseph's Canal, right? Even the church and the Muslims recognized what Joseph had done. So, where was Goshen? Good question. I want you to see the road coming down. See the way of Horus? The Bible calls it the way of the Philistines. The Egyptians called it the way of Horus, later be called the way of the sea. Kind of coming down through there. See, it goes into a town called Rawadi. Beautiful. Rawadi means a house with two doors, because you can go one way to Canaan, in the Levant and Persia. You go one way back into Egypt, right? And then they were on the Puyallup branch of the Nile, and they could actually sail all the way out. So what was happening is the caravans would come between Mesopotamia and Egypt, and they'd go through the land of Canaan. So Canaanites started going down and living there to receive the trade, because they were taking the caravans through their land. Make sense? Yeah, pretty exciting to me. And so the traders and merchants settled here in this place called Rawadi. And so we find four-room Israelite houses, Canaanite houses. We find duck-bill axes. We find all these things from the Canaanites. They're buried with them. We know Canaanites are living there. Pretty kind of cool, right? Yeah. And then that leads us to think that's probably Goshen. Well, I told you that this whole area is a delta, no stones. All these stones have been imported. Now, this is at a place called Tanis, that is just over from this Rawadi that we were just looking at, had different names. These monuments were all moved from there, but they were all brought from somewhere else to that place called Rawadi, and then over here to Tanis. So I want to go on and tell you, and then you can kind of just see these mud bricks here. So, you see all that in the background? Those are palaces, mud brick palaces, because it's just a floodplain, okay? So what's going to happen every year when there's a flood? Or you're going to have to rebuild the bricks. What were the Hebrews going to be employed in doing? Okay, so I used to wonder, where did all this happen? Well, it's got to happen down here, because that's what the whole business is, right? And there's another one of our bricks with the straw, right? Okay, well, let's go on. So down here in Rawadi is kind of like being in Tijuana and San Diego, right? Chula Vista on the border. It's a border town. And what happens is these Canaanite guys become strong. As a matter of fact, they have the war chariot and the compound bow, because there's no natural enemies of the Egyptians. They have deserts protecting them, a waterfall protecting them, and they take over the area. They're called the Hyksos, or the foreign rulers, the shepherd kings. They're from Canaan, and they rule as pharaohs for 100 years. Now, they can't rule all the way down in Luxor we were at, and Thebes and all that, but they rule here. They wear the same things as pharaohs. So what does the Bible say happens? Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Have you ever wondered, if Joseph is this great guy, how does a king come along who doesn't know Joseph? Right? Is that a fair question? Well, now you kind of know. These guys don't trust him, because the family of Jacob are in the Egyptian government. Why would we trust them? Even if we were racially related, we're not going to trust these guys. They're going to subvert us, and we'll be taken out. And he said, "Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and in the event of war, they also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us." This is actually a Hyksos king, by the way, here on the right. So they appointed them as taskmasters. They appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor, and they began to make the things. Now, for 100 years, these Hyksos, these Canaanite rulers, these shepherd kings, they rule as pharaohs in the delta. Well, the guys down in the south, they don't like this very much. So this guy is a Theban prince. His name is Second-in-Ra. He comes up and he starts a war. The guy actually says, it's kind of a funny story. The Hyksos king says, hey, even the crocodile, the hippopotamus is down in the south are bothering me. He mounts whatever into his boat and he goes down and he sails down, starts a war of liberation. Doesn't fare too well. Can you see his head? All these axe heads. You can see them in the Museum of Civilization in Cairo today. He dies. But his sons, Amos, Kamos, continue and overthrow them, and they found what's called the 18th dynasty, the most powerful dynasty of Egypt. They drive them out. Now, they're not going to trust those Hebrews either, are they? Because they're just kind of, they've been down in the south, so they don't know what's going on up there. They don't know that they were previously involved with their government. You know, it's been 100 years, so they continue making problems with them as well. Here you can kind of see the 18th dynasty. Down in Thebes, this is where they were from down in the south. Now up here at Peru-Nefer, which was called Rawadi, and Avaris had all these different names, Per-Ramses, as time went on and different people were there. So that's the 18th dynasty right there, right? 2 capitals. And so these guys are very warrior-like. They build the first great empire of Egypt. They were going up and all their temples are showing how they were fighting their enemies down in Nubia and their enemies up in Canaan and Syria and the Levant and the Hittites, and they're doing all of these different things. So while the enslaved Hebrews are making bricks in the Delta, the new kingdom pharaohs are bringing Egypt to its most glorified period as untold wealth poured in from Asia and Africa. And so they're building these fabulous temples down in Luxor. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at that. Those lotus flowers, here's papyrus flowers, and the columns just splendid and wonderful. 1,500 years this temple evolves. Here we got Ramses the Great. He claims to have built it. It had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. He only added to the front, but these incredible statues of him, you think they were poured from the same mold. They're just so splendid. 4-seated, 2-seated and 4 standing. And then, of course, he had 2 obelisks there. And so these obelisks would be pointing up to the sky. Today, only 1 obelisk is there, because the other is decorating Paris, as you can see right here. Luxor Temple, gorgeous. Papyrus buds, lotus flowers. All of this was just splendid. But the world's largest temple is 1.5 miles to the north, Karnak. Look at all these rams going down. The rams used to go all the way back to Luxor Temple 1.5 miles away. And as you go into the temple, you can just see all of these rams, and you can see Ramses the Great standing between them. The ram became the symbol of Amun-Ra, and so this became the sun god for them, and so they followed that, worship that way. You go into the hypostyle hall, and you can see these incredible capitals. It's like a forest of sequoia trees, isn't it? Or redwoods. Look at that. These are large enough, those capitals, for 100 men to stand on each one of them. That's how big they are. And they still support 70-ton beams. There was a sacred lake there, and then they had these beetles, because the beetle symbolized to the ancient Egyptian the afterlife. The dung beetle rolling his dung, and then the beetle would emerge out of that in the morning, and they connected that to the resurrection. Look at the color still there in the papyrus flowers in Luxor Temple. I was attracted to this particular obelisk because it's 30 feet taller than her father's. This actually turns out to be the queen, Hatshepsut, who was a pharaoh. And it's taller than her father's. She actually built this incredible mortuary temple on the west bank there at Thebes. I think it's the most beautiful building in all of Egypt. And she built it for her death, but they never found her body there. They didn't find her mummy. Very strange and very odd. As a matter of fact, she has all of her exploits. She went down into Punt or Egypt, got all these different things, but somebody came through and chiseled out all of her images. See it? Look at that. Chiseled out her name, chiseled out her face. What was in the world was going on there? She was powerful. That's her father, Tutmosis I obelisk. Hers is 30 feet higher, and she's the one that had the even bigger one that cracked down in Aswan we talked about earlier, right? Now, her father was Tutmosis I. He didn't have any quote-unquote royal sons. He had some sons through secondary wives, but not through the queen. He had a daughter, Hatshepsut. So one of his sons marries Hatshepsut, and he becomes Tutmosis II. Make sense? Tutmosis II and Hatshepsut have a daughter, but they don't have any sons. Right? So, when Tutmosis II dies, the priest put up on the throne the guy's boy, Tutmosis III, when he's 8 years old. So he reigns with his stepmother, aunt, for a few years, and she decides, fully on this, she decides that she'll become the Pharaoh. And she becomes a Pharaoh. And she builds all those great obelisks, and she does this whole journey down into Punt or Ethiopia and brings up all these animals and plants and so on. Well, she rules for about 25 years, and then for some unknown reason, she's overthrown. And all of her images are effaced. And here's something interesting. You see this? They even built a building around her obelisk so you can't see it in the temple. Yeah. What was going on? Well, this was Tutmosis III. Whenever he was able to overthrow his stepmother aunt, he hated her because she had ruled in his place for like 25 years, and from his perspective, even though he wasn't royal, right? He hated her. So what was going on with that? Man. As I said, she built this incredible, splendid temple for her death, but her mummy was never found with the other mummies of this dynasty. Remember, the worst thing you can do to your enemy is not to kill them, but to destroy their mummy. Because then they can't be reconnected in the afterlife in their thinking, right? It makes sense? The ka would have to aimlessly wander throughout time. Well, let's try and put it together. The Bible says in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, in the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, he began to build the temple of the Lord. So here we have a timeline. If you believe what the Bible says, there's a timeline. Right? The Exodus took place 480 years from the building of Solomon's temple, right? Happened the 4th year of Solomon. So 480 years before the temple's built. We believe the temple's built around 970 BC, so you can add 480 to that. Comes back to 1450 BC. Moses would have been fleeing 40 years earlier, right? It helps us to see that the Exodus takes place during this period of time of the Tutmosis and of Hatshepsut. If you're following biblical chronology. If you're following Cecil B. DeMille's, or if you're following Disney, who's the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Ramses the Great, right? However, if you're going to follow what the Bible says, it puts you back into the Tutmosis period. Fascinating, isn't it? Remember what the story is? They didn't trust the Hebrews. They were harshly treating the Hebrews. Jochebed and Amram have a boy. They decide they're going to try and save him, and they put him into an ark. But they put the ark strategically where the princess would come to do her bath. By the way, up in the delta region of Rowati or Avaris, it's now being called Peru Nefer, which means beautiful village. And she finds the boy. She has no son. She thinks it's a gift from the Nile god Hapi. Right? Bible says she wants to adopt him. Now it's very interesting. Moses means born of. Remember when we talked about Moses? Born of the moon god Ah. We talked about Kamos, born of the deified soul Ka. We talked about Tutmos, the scribal god Tut with that ibis god. Very interesting. Beautiful. Ramos, we call him Ramses, born of the sun god Ra. Probably named him Hapimos, born of the Nile god Hapi. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then, of course, Miriam goes up and says, well, you want to get a nurse to take care of the baby for you? All right? Where they moved into the palace grounds. I don't know what happened. My mind kind of runs pretty wild. But the Bible says that as Moses grew up, he had all the advantages. Trained as a great military leader, trained in the language, trained in every way, prepared to be Pharaoh. But then something happened. Hatshepsut dies. All of the mummies have been found except hers. They think maybe they've connected her to a tooth somewhere hidden away now. Tutmosis III sent his soldiers through, effacing all of her inscriptions, all of her images, covering up her obelisks. Tutmosis III would become a great, great warrior. This is actually from his war chariot. I just took this in March at the Museum of Civilization there. Isn't that splendid? Look at that. Wow. He invaded Syria in the Levant 27 times. Almost every year of his reign, he went up there. He had something about not liking them very much, right? And so this would be the Pharaoh of the Exodus. This would be Moses' stepbrother, if you please. This would be the one who says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. Brother Moses, you had your opportunity and you blew it. You blew it. Now you're a shepherd out there, and I'm the ruler of the two lands, the greatest ruler in the earth. Now here's the interesting thing. He dies, Egyptologists tell us, March 17, 1450. They say he was at least 60 years old when he died, but his mummy was that of a 40-year-old man. Doesn't add up, does it? When is Passover? In the spring. So could it be that he is at the water and drowns in the Red Sea or Sea of Reeds, take your pick? He drowns in the water, and they can't go back to the capital without a body, and they take another body, and nobody was any smarter at the end of the 70 days because they just didn't know until they x-rayed the mummies and studied the mummies. Remember the story? Moses had made the choice to step away and not be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Can you imagine? What a penetrating insight into Moses is found in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. When Moses had grown up, he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Messiah as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. What? Wait a minute. If he'd have been obedient, he would have had this reward. Right? I mean, that's pretty impressive. Many of us have traveled around the world to see that. Right? He didn't think that was a reward worth selling his soul for, did he? If he'd have been a teachable and pliable student of the priest, he would have received a rich, wonderful burial beyond our wildest imagination. But he didn't want the reward that came with the treasures of Egypt because he knew it was a death cult. As soon as you came to power, you began planning for your death, whether building a pyramid or tunneling into the West Bank of Thebes. You began preparing for your death, and he said, I don't want that. I'm looking ahead to a different reward. Now, only one tomb has come down untouched, revealing the priceless treasures of Egypt. It was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter and his patron, Lord Carnarvon. And as you go up from the Valley of the Kings, you go up and you come to his little place, and it's fascinating. After 8 seasons of looking, they were ready to give up. But then 3 days into the new dig, steps were found going down to the sealed doorway, and Carter had to wait. He had to call for Carnarvon to come from England to be there. And just imagine what happened. On November 26th, the lower door was breached, and Carter peered in through a small hole in the door. Here's what he said. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner, darkness and blank space as far as an iron testing rod could see. Candle tests were applied as a precaution against possible foul gases, and then widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in. Lord Carnarvon standing anxiously beside me to hear the verdict. At first I could see nothing, the hot air escaping from the chamber causing the candle flame to flicker. But presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist, strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. For the moment, eternity it must have seemed to the others standing by, I was struck dumb with amazement. And when Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, inquired anxiously, "Can you see anything?" It was all I could do to get out the words, "Yes, wonderful things." Oh, how exciting, huh? Can you imagine? Now that first room that he saw had been entered in by thieves and left in disarray, but soon they would go into new rooms that had not been entered since the death of the boy king. What had happened is that the boy died quickly, and so they started digging for the next pharaoh on top of him, and they covered up the entrances. And look what they found. Now this is from a place that is called it's kind of trying to recreate some of these things, but here we can see the black skin of death, resin living again, all these golden statues, all these things depicting the hope that King Tut would live again, spelling out the whole hope that the dead king would live and be reborn in the afterlife. His death mask of beaten gold reveals the handsome features of the boy king who ruled only 9 years and died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 18 in 1350. The beard identifies him as one with Osiris, the god of the dead. I love this footstool, this beautiful throne room. And I'm going to see if I can make my computer go back. Can you see the sun disk at the top? Can you see the hands coming down, the rays? That's Theotan. His father was Akhenaten, okay? A-T-E-N. He was the heretical monotheistic king. We'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow night. I'll try and tie that story in for you. Very fascinating. His name originally was Tutankhaten, and it became Tutankhamun, a different god. And we'll talk about why. Anyways, gold, beautiful. Look at that. But I'm always interested in his footstool. Can you see the footstool? There are Asiatics on one side and Africans on the other side. Remember what the Bible says? Sit on your throne, and I'll make your enemies a footstool under your feet. So every time he sat down, he's putting his feet on his enemies, saying, I'm ruling over them, right? I'm ruling over them. Kind of interesting. So there was a nest of 7 coffins, one being 22 karat gold and weighing 296 pounds. Can you imagine Moses turned away from a burial like that? Because he knew it was just a death cult. He said, I don't want that. I saw something different. He was looking ahead to his reward. Can you imagine what they found there with the flowers fading? More than 143 jewels were found over his body, over 5,000 priceless treasures in the tomb. Effigies of gods and goddesses, jewels, chests, vases, furniture, ivory. Over 5,000 were removed by Carter during the next few years. Look at these golden toe coverings in case his toes didn't stay true. And I have a pillow. I travel with a pillow all the time, but I cannot imagine. That's a beautiful pillow. It's actually a pillow, right? It's a neck rest, but I can't imagine sleeping with that, can you? It'd be rougher than the hotels. Okay. These are the canopic jars. Look at that. Out of alabaster, just splendid with the organs in it, just splendid. Moses turned away from the treasures of Egypt, preferring a different reward. Why? Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone turn away from a funeral like that? Because he believed the religion of Egypt was just a death cult. Well, the Ka and the Ba was invented by the priest to control the population. So he turned away from that. Ka and the Ba. By the way, there's Tut. He's back into his tomb there in Thebes in Upper Egypt. But Moses had heard about the true God at his mother's knee. She had told him about the true God, and somehow that rang true. The words of the 49th Psalm come to my mind when I think about this story, and I believe it lets us know why Moses left Egypt. He said, do not be overawed when a man grows rich, when the splendor of his house increases, for he will take nothing with him when he dies. Though while he lived, he counted himself blessed, he will join the generation of his fathers who will never see the light of life. For all can see that wise men die and leave their wealth to others. Their tombs will remain their houses forever. But God will redeem my life from the grave. He will surely take me to himself. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, I thank you tonight for the privilege of being here in the Northwest and Puyallup, this church, to share these stories with this group of people. Thank you so much for the privilege of being here and reviewing these things and looking at the treasures. And we too want to ponder what Moses pondered. He made a choice to turn away from the treasures of Egypt. What a choice he made, because he somehow had confronted you. I pray that you'll help us to make choices as we confront you, or you confront us as well today. We want to turn our hearts to you like he did long ago. Help us to choose that better reward as we follow in your footsteps, is my prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen. So this is what they actually found, where the flowers faded when they opened the tomb. Isn't that beautiful? Kind of recolored a little bit, you can imagine. Tomorrow night, Fabulous Tales, the Telltales. On Monday, that's Petra. Then we're going to go to Jerusalem on Tuesday, and the Footsteps of Jesus on Wednesday, Iraq on Thursday. But our next meeting is going to be tomorrow night, Fabulous Tales, the Telltales. So we got some good things to do before you go away. My wife tells me I talk way too fast, Pastor Jason.
Did he talk too fast?
So the good news is, I think there's a printed copy, is that right?
Yeah, we will have printed copies available.
With more details than I gave you tonight. So you can take that and cherish it.
All right, we have to give something away, though, don't we?
Yes.
So we've got a first or third century. Which one is it? Do you know?
First or fourth century. I'd have to open up and try.
You'd have to open it and try. Let's leave it bubble wrapped. It'll be a surprise. You can come ask him after you open it. So, Ryan, do you want to pick one of these out?
Is that from somebody that was here tonight?
Yep, these are all from tonight.
Oh, boy.
Ticket number 048-6089. 6089. Oh, we got it. Come on up.
Wow. Look at that. Wow. Congratulations.
Should we check it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Congratulations.
Okay, thank you.
Now, tomorrow night, we're going to light a lamp.
Oh,
if you have olive oil for me.
I think I can do some olive oil.
So would that be fun to light a lamp? Now, I'm going to let you know a secret. We will not light an old lamp. We'll light a replica, if that's okay.
I think that's probably a better idea.
But it'll let us see how they burn, because they burn olive oil, and we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow night and see how they burn and how it smells.
All right, so will you be sticking around for a minute?
Yes,
if they want to come up and see?
for sure.
Feel free, for those who need to rush home, go home. If you'd like to come up and see and talk, we'll stick around for a little while, and we'll see you tomorrow night. God bless.